Today I'm going to talk about rigging in Apex and how we can use the Apex nodes along with kinefx to build a rig. If you want to follow along with me, you can download this zip file for free from Patreon, or you can also just use the geometry that I'm using. It actually ships with Houdini with Side Effects Labs. So I'm going to go inside here, and this hand that I'm using, if you type in Paul, you'll see that there's this labs test geometry Paul, and I'm just using the right arm over here. I've just like cut off I've separated the arm from the rest of the body, and then I just centered it and rotated it, and that's all that this is right here. So let's go ahead and get started. So what we want to do is we want to build our skeleton using some of the kinefx nodes, and the first node that we're going to be using is called the skeleton sop. So let's go ahead and place that down. And I'm going to put the display flag on the skeleton sop, but we still want to be able to see our hand. So I'm going to control click on this template, and our arm is still going to be showing, even though we're on the skeleton node, which is exactly what we need. And so if I hit enter, it's going to put us into the handles tool, which allows us to place our skeleton down. And so I'm just going to start here at the bottom, and I'm just going to start placing my joints. I'm going to do one for the wrist, and then I'm going to do 3 for each finger. And once you're done, you can just hit middle mouse click, and that will stop the chain. And then you can click again on the wrist joint, and then you can start placing the rest of the joints. All right, now that that's finished, I want to make a few changes. So we can go into modify, and then I'm going to go into tweak mode. And if we move these joints, see, it looks like it's moving everything. So I'm going to turn on child compensate, and that will allow me to move these joints without affecting any of the other ones. And the placement I have here isn't super great. I think I'm going to move this up a little bit, and I'm going to move this closer to over here. And I think the rest of it is pretty much fine. I'll probably wind up copying my other skeleton from the zip file I have open because I already have it renamed. I'm too lazy to type in all the names again, but that brings me to the next point. We need to rename all these joints so that they're easily identifiable. Like it's just 0.0, and that's not a great name. So I'm going to select this joint, the first one. I'm going to rename it to JNT_master. And JNT just means joint. And I'm going to give that JNT prefix to all of the joints here. And actually, I'm just going to copy my other skeleton over, and I'll show you the names that I've done. So let me just delete this really quickly and add this back in. And it looks like I have display axis turned on. Okay, so let me make sure I'm in modify, and let me just put the mouse over all the names. So what I did was I gave, as I said earlier, I gave this one joint master, and then this one just JNT wrist, and then all the other ones, I gave them the name of the finger that it is, and then which position that it is. For example, since this is a thumb, it'll be thumb root, this will be thumb mid, and then the last one will be thumb tip. And then for this one, we'll have index root, mid, tip. Then we have mid, root, and then I guess I just called this mid, which is fine. And then we have mid tip, and then we have ring, root, mid, and tip. And then pinky, root, mid, and tip. And so that's the naming convention that I'll be using for this skeleton. The next part that we want to do is we want to create weights that allow the rig to deform this geometry. And so we can do that using the joint capture by harmonic. So I'll drop that down. And so we need 2 inputs, and I'm going to turn off this template flag. And for the first input, I'm going to plug that into this geometry, and then the second input is going to go into our skeleton. And I'm going to put the display flag on that, and it's going to show the tets that we have over here on the right, or that it created internally. And then we'll see the geometry that we have, and we'll see all of the capture weights of the weights that the geometry is weighted for the skeleton that we made. And so we can test this out, and the way that we do that is we need a joint deform. I'm going to place that down. And if we hold J and what's called drag up and drop, it'll connect all the nodes for us. And it's going to give us an error, and that's just because there's nothing in, there's no animation going in here. So we need to actually just cut that wire. And we're going to drop down a rig pose, and that's going to allow us to just pose the joints. And that one is just going to plug into the what is this one? Let's see what it says. Just the capture pose, I guess. And so we'll plug that in. And so if you make sure you're on the handles tool, put the mouse in the viewport, hit enter, or you can select the handle right there. And so now if we select any of the joints, we'll be able to move them around. And I guess that actually brings up an issue right here. If I want to move this finger, if I want to close the finger, there's no good way to do it because like the rotation, like the axes are like all messed up. And so it's like really hard. Like if you just want to close the finger, it's going to be like really difficult to do that. So I'm going to orient these joints, and we can do that with the orient joints node. So after the skeleton has been dropped, I'm going to do an orient joints. I'm going to connect that up, and looks like I don't have dropping on wires enabled. I should be able to do that now. Yep, there we go. And now we have the orient joints. You see if I disable it, it's affecting the orient of some of them. But for the reference vector, I actually want Z pointing up the bone. So I'm going to do 0, 0, and then 1. And then I think I'm just going to enable this up vector. And let me check to see what I had in the other scene. Okay, so I had 1 for here. You'll have to mess around until you get something that looks good. And I had like minus 0.7. And the reason why that's a good value is because, hold on, let me just mess with this a little bit. It's going to give us a good rotation axis for rotating these fingers. So let me go back here to the joint deform. If I select the rig pose, now if I want to close the finger, it's going to be a lot easier to do this. Now, beware that the orient joints, it doesn't always give the perfect result for everything, but I'm just putting it down because it procedurally does everything, and it's better than nothing. And in this case, it's more than good enough. So we don't need this rig pose, and we don't need the joint deform anymore, so I'm going to select those and get rid of them. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create some attributes that are going to be picked up by Apex when we do our rigging logic. And so the first thing that we're going to put down is the tags. And I think we're only going to be using one tag, and I'm just going to be giving a tag to the master joint, and I'm just going to rename it master, or I'm going to give it the tag master. And it may not make sense now, but we'll see how we can use it later on when we're using the Apex nodes. And so in order to do that, we're going to need an attribute adjust array node. But I think if you just type in tags, they already have this preset, which drops down to attribute adjust array, and it sets it to the appropriate attribute class, which in this case is point, and it gives it the appropriate name, which is tags. And so I'm going to select, or not select, but I'm going to drag the out or the input and then drag into the output of the biharmonic capture, the second one, the capture pose. And I'll put the display flag on here. And so we want to give this root joint, or this master joint, we want to give it the tag master. And so let me scroll down. And so where it says set values, we're gonna click plus, and this is gonna allow us to select a joint and give it a tag value. So I'm going to click on this right here, and I'm gonna select our joint. And there's one thing that I want to point out is that it's almost always a bad idea, because you can see right here it says 0 because that's 0.0. It's a bad idea to use the point number for assigning these tags. And the reason why is because if you decide to go back later on and adjust your rig, your point number may change, and so then it will be assigned to the wrong point. And so there's a better way of doing that. Because all of these joints already have a name attribute, we can just use that name attribute. And so we can do that if we click on the select icon, and then let's see, where is it? This right here where it says select groups or connected geometry. Let's see. Oh, no, that's not what we want. Let me see. Which one is it? I think I can actually bring it up easily just by hitting 9. Oh, okay. So it was this one right here. Select groups or connected geometry. And then I guess it's not showing. So I'll click on this button right here, display groups and attribute list. And why is it not showing? Hey, what's going on? This is me from the future. I'm just adding in this quick insert because for some reason, when I tried to show you the attribute list, there was a viewport bug that prevented that list from showing up. So just to clarify how to pick by name instead of point number, let's do the process again. So we're going to click on the select geometry from viewport, and it's going to bring up the picker. And so you're going to click on this right here, and it's going to bring up this list. Now this was a list that didn't show before. And so if we click on this gear icon, we can set this to points, and now it's going to show all of the point attributes down here. And then we can select an attribute to pick by. And so now I'm going to set this to name. And so now whenever we select a point, it's going to select the points by its name instead of its point number. And so you can see right here it says 0, but when I hit enter, it's going to switch it to its name. All right, I hope this clarifies things. Let's move on with the rest of the video. And so now we can give it the value. Let's see, we wanted it to be master. And we'll check all of these in a moment in the spreadsheet, but we can get rid of that null because we don't need that anymore. And so I guess the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use an attribute adjust dictionary. And like I said, this may not make sense now, but it'll make sense later on. What we're going to do is we're going to promote the values, or we're going to promote how we want each joint to be able to be transformed. Like for example, this joint, the master joint, we want it to be able to have, translation, rotation, and scale. But for the rest of these, we only need rotation because it's going to be a FK setup. So I'm going to drop down an attribute adjust dictionary, and I'm going to plug it in. And we need to make sure that it's set to point. And we're going to set this to properties because that's the name of the attribute that we're going to be putting on. And then for the group, it's going to be the same one. We're going to configure the controls for the master joint first. So I'm going to click on this select geometry and viewport, and it should remember our settings. So it's going to be selecting by name. And so if I select that and hit enter, it's going to select our joint master. And that's exactly what we want. And then for the key, it's going to be called promote. And then it's going to be T, R, and S. And this just means that this joint is going to be able to be translated, rotated, and scaled. And if you're wondering where I'm getting these values from, it's all in the documentation, and that's simply where I'm getting it from. And then we want to configure the rest of the joints. And so I'm going to alt click on this node and drag it, and it's going to allow me to duplicate it. And then I'm going to wire it in to the previous node. And for this attribute adjust dictionary, I'm just going to name it master so that we know that that one's affecting the master. And so now we want to set up the properties for the other joints. And so for this one, I'm going to put an exclamation mark, and that means it's going to be not this one. So it'll be everything else. And then for this one, all we need is R because all the other joints are only going to be able to be rotated. So I'm going to right click on this node, and I'm going to go to spreadsheet, and let's check the spreadsheet to make sure all the attributes are working properly. And let's see. Looks like something didn't work. Let me check this one right here. Group not joint master. Oh, yeah, I made a mistake. Sorry. It needs to be before the equal sign. Okay, now it's working. Okay, so yeah, just make sure the exclamation mark is before the equal sign. And so now we can see that the tags, okay, so our master joint has translation, rotation, and scale promoted. And then all the other joints only have rotation promoted, and that's exactly what we need. So we can close this, and we're ready to do the next part. And so the next part, Apex works in a structure called the packed folder structure. And so we need to make sure that all of our data is in that structure for Apex. And so the way we can do that is by using a pack folder. And for the first input, we're going to give it the geometry. So I'm going to select the geometry right here, the rest geometry. I'm going to plug it into the first input. And then for the second input, I'm just going to do the capture pose and plug it in. And then for the third input, I'm going to grab this over here and plug it in. That'll put the display flag on here. And we need to rename some of these. And again, if you're wondering where I'm getting all this information from, it's just from the documentation. Now, these names that I'm giving it here on this side can be anything. It's just that Apex expects, it has a default set of, like its defaults are set up to work with a certain naming convention. And so we're just going to stick to that naming convention. And so the first one is going to be geometry. And so that's going to be our base shape. And so this one, we're going to do shape. And then the next one is a skeleton. Like I'm just doing it in order from left to right. And so the next one is going to be our skeleton. So this one will be skeleton. And then the next one is also a skeleton, but specifically it's our guide skeleton, but it'll just still be skeleton right here. And so then for the name, this needs to be base. And so it'll be base shape. And then this one also needs to be base, and it'll be base skeleton. And then this one is our guide skeleton. So it'll be guides and then skeleton. And I think that does it for now. this is everything that we're going to be doing in kinefx. Well, actually, that's not true because we're going to be going to Apex to do some rigging. And then we're going to go into kinefx. We're going to go from Apex to kinefx to do some secondary motion. And then we're going to go back to Apex again after that. And so I think that's it for now. And I'll see you in the next part. All right, let's move on to the next section where we're going to be using the Apex nodes to create some rig logic. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create our FK logic. So we're going to do this by creating an auto rig component. And I'm going to drop that in and plug it in. And there we go. And so we're going to plug this input into the packed folder. And it says input character has a guide skeleton. Do you want to use it? And we're going to say yes. And so that's why we gave it that specific naming convention, because it can automatically pick up that we have that guide skeleton. And so we're going to hit yes. And so right now, the component source, we need to switch what it's doing, and we want an FK setup. So for this snippet, I'm going to go and I'm going to find where it says FK, and right here where it says FK transform, we'll do that. And so let's click on the animate tool so that we'll actually get, either that or the handle should work, but I think, so the animate tool work. And so now we can see our skeleton. And so if we click on it, we'll see the transform handle, and so we can move it. And this is looking good. And we'll see something that I wanted to add is that, remember how before we added that dictionary that had that attribute called properties, where we promoted different, what I think it was like translation, scale, and rotation on the master. And then for all the other ones, we only did rotation. We can actually see how that's affecting the rig right here. If I select this joint right here, you'll notice that there's a transform handle and it allows me to transform it. But if I select this joint, there's only rotation. And the reason why is because we added transform and scale for this handle. And so we can scale it, transform, and rotate. Back, it was over here on this attribute adjust dictionary for the master, T, R, and S, translation, rotation, and scale. And then for the rest of the joints, only rotation. And we can see how that's reflected over here in our rig. So I'm going to also change the name. I'm just going to name it to FK. And that way I can keep track of what each of these auto rig components are doing, because we're going to have multiple ones. And then there's only one other thing I want to change, and I'm going to give it the tag. I'm going to call it FK. And this is just going to give each of these the tag FK, and it'll make it easier later on. It's going to make it easier later on to make an adjustment to all of these FKs. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is we need to add a bone deform. And you'll notice our geometry isn't showing, but once we set up the bone deform, it should come back. And so let's do in another auto rig component, and we're going to wire this in, and we're going to switch it over to a bone deform. And we're pretty much just going to be hitting yes for this every single time, because we're always going to be using the guide skeleton. So let's put the display flag on here. And what is going on? I don't know why it's doing that, but where it says snippet, we're going to switch this over to bone deform. And let's see what's going on. Let me enter the handles tool so I can go into the proper state and select this. And I'm not sure what it was doing. Well, I don't know why it was showing that before, but it seems to be working now, which is good. All right, so let me click on this tool again. And there we go, now it's working. Yeah, I don't know, I just seem to be getting a lot of weird viewport issues. But thankfully it's working now. So now if I select this, we can see that it's deforming. So this is essentially doing like a similar thing to when we did the joint deform with the rig pose earlier on. But we can see that this is working now, and now we can scale it. Well, not scale, but we can transform our rig, and then the geometry is going to move along with it. And so just like the other one, I'm going to rename this to bone deform. Yeah, and then if you ever want to reset the animation, you can just click on that and it'll remove the animation that you did. And so if you're having any viewport issues like me, I highly recommend having Labs installed, because it has this reset viewport. If you're ever having like weird glitches in the viewport, I usually you hit the reset viewport and it fixes lots of issues all the time. But let's move on to the next one. I think that's all that we're doing for the bone deform. And so now we can move on to the transform driver. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a control for our rig so that we can animate it. And because we're not going to be doing animation, we're not going to be directly manipulating these joints, but instead we're going to create control for it. And since this is a really simple rig, I'm only going to be creating one control, and it's going to be for this root or for this master joint. So let's do another auto rig component. Wire that in, use the guide skeleton. And then for this one, we're going to be using a transform driver. So let's click on that right there. And that's going to set it up. But there's still some stuff that we need to do manually. And so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to driven. And so we need to control a set of joints. And so it's easier. You can put in the joint name right here, but that's another reason why tags come in easier. It's like, for instance, if you want to affect a whole group of joints, you could just put in the tag right here. And so that's why I gave this the tag master, so I don't have to remember the joint name. So I guess in this case, it's kind of simple because it's just one joint, but I think later on we will be doing something that's going to affect multiple joints, so it'll make more sense to use the tag. But for this one, I'm just going to do hashtag master. And actually, I'm going to do something else. Before I do that, I'm going to show you something else. I'm going to go over to control, and we're going to, it says driver, and so we need to give this control a name. And so I'm just going to name it master. And the reason why is because it's going to be controlling the master joint. So we have the joint master, and then we have the control that's going to be driving it. And so for the driver guide, this is like, we basically want this to have the same position as our joint. And so I'm going to, that joint is called joint master. So I'm going to do joint master here, and it should transform our joint to match that. Now here's where the tags come in. So I'm going to take this right here, I'm going to transform it, and you'll notice that nothing's happening. And the reason why is because nothing is parented to this controller. And so when I go over here to the driven, I can choose all of the controls that I want to be driven by that. And so I'm going to use the tag master because I know that I want the master to be controlled by this master controller. Or I'm sorry, to phrase that better, I want the master joint to be controlled by this master driver. So I'm going to, in this driven transform, I'm going to do hashtag master. And as soon as I hit enter, we'll see that the hand snaps. And the reason why that's working is because if you remember in this tag right here, we gave the joint master the tag value master. And so we're telling, when we select this again, we're saying that we want our master to be driven. We're saying that we want all of our joints with this tag hashtag master to be driven by this master controller. And now, like I said, in this case, since it's just one joint, we could have just as easily put in the name of the joint. But I think later on we're going to be making, I think actually the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to hide these controls, and because like we don't need these because we're doing a really simple animation. And I guess this will be a better demonstration of why you use these tags. And so let me do one more thing on this node before I demonstrate that. So I'm going to go to the shape, and where it says cross wires, I'm going to switch this to, well, I guess there's no switch. So I'm just going to type in circle plane, and that's going to give us a circle right here. And then I'm going to put the scale to 3, 3, and 3. And then I'm also going to change the color to yellow. And then I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit D with my mouse in the viewport. I'm going to go to geometry. I'm going to set the wire width to 2, and this is just going to make it easier to see this wire. And then I'm also going to go to scene. I'm just going to put the anti-aliasing samples up to 8. And just in case you're wondering, the reason why I know that to put circle plane here is because there's a node, and actually it's going to be the next node that we're placing down. So we might as well just put it down now. It's called configure controls. Oh, where is it? Apex configure controls. And this allows us to configure the controls that we've created. And so let me just plug this in. And so if I hit control configs, then click on this down arrow, you can see that there's a shape override. And so you can see that there's all these different shapes that we can use. And so I know it's circle plane just because it's one of these in this list right here. We could have just as easily done this. So where it says, let's see, control group, which one were we doing? The master control. Let's see, I could have selected the master right here. And then where it says shape override, I can do ball. And so we can see now that it switched to ball. But we've already configured that one, so we don't need to worry about doing that. And so here is the better example of using tags than what I showed you before. So in this simple rig, the only control that we're going to be animating is this master control. So we don't want any of these showing because it's just visual clutter. And so what I'm going to do is, if you remember earlier, on this FK auto rig component, we had given the tag FK. And so we've given all of our FK, anything that's FK will have this tag. And so I can go to configure controls, and then for tags, you do hashtag. And so I'm going to do hashtag FK. And so this is going to allow us to override the shapes on our FK. And I just don't want them showing at all. So I'm going to use shape override and just have nothing selected. And you'll see that they all go away. And so I could choose something else, but like I said, we don't need them. So I'm just going to put nothing there. And so now the only control that we have is our master control, because we're just doing a simple arm wave. This is all that we're going to need. And I think that's pretty much it for this section. I think the last thing that I'm going to do, just to make this a bit easier, or not easier, but so it doesn't have to cook. Usually when I'm building a rig at this point, when I'm done with the rig, I'll usually cache out the end of this. And the reason why is because if you open up the scene again, it will have to cook all of these nodes again, and sometimes it can take a long time. So usually what I like to do is I'll just drop down a file cache node and I'll plug that in. And usually I erase the hip name or from the base name, because I only want it to be the name of the node, and then I'll just name it something like bake hand rig or something like that. And then we don't need time dependency because it's just going to be one frame. And then I'm going to hit save to disk. And so now next time you open the scene, you won't have to worry about cooking all of those nodes again. Now, do be wary though, if you make changes above, you will have to recache this out, of course. All right, that's it for now. In the next section, we're going to be looking at doing the animation. All right, so let's add some animation to this character. So first we need to add the Apex character to the scene. So we can do Apex add scene, or Apex add character rather. And so we're actually gonna be plugging a second input because we're adding the character and we don't have a scene yet. So the first one will be blank. All right, so now we have our character added, and this is also gonna give our character our name. And by default, it's just set to whatever this node is. So I'm just gonna name it hand, so that our character is called hand. And you can check that out if you go to the animation and then rig tree, and then click on the hierarchy. You can see that our character is called hand, but let me X this to get rid of that, and then go back to our parameters. And now we can do the scene animate, and we're gonna add some animation to our character. So we're gonna do scene animate. And also, if you like the wiring style the way I have it, I decided I'm just gonna switch it to the curved wiring style. I just like that better for now, so I'm gonna keep it on that. But anyway, I'm gonna plug this scene animate in, and then I'm gonna click on this show handle. And you're probably gonna get this selection sets, but we don't really need to worry about that because we only have one control. And so I'll hit Shift V to make this go away, and it tells you all the hotkeys over here on the left side. But I do want the channel widget, so if I hit G, it'll bring this up right here. And then I can select our master control right there. And so I'm gonna go to frame 1, and let's see, I'm gonna put in our first keyframe. So I'm gonna alt click on the RX so that we can start setting a keyframe. And I'm just gonna copy this parameter over. And then I'm gonna go to frame 15. And then I'm gonna put in one more keyframe, and then also alt click to key that. And then on frame 30, I'm gonna put our last keyframe. And I'll alt click it to put that keyframe in. And so now we should have some beautiful animation. And then also I limited the timeline to 80 just because it's easier to see the individual ticks. I think by default it's 240, but I moved it to 80. All right, so now we have some beautiful animation going on. And the next step is we're going to add some secondary motion using kinefx. And so we're going to extract the control rig. So let's do that right now. So I'm going to do control extract. And we're going to plug this in. So we need to choose a character. So I'm going to do extract from folder, and then I'm just going to select our hand character that we made. And let's see, I'm going to drop down to null just so that I can view the control rig. All right, perfect. And now we need to now this control rig isn't going to have animation, so we need to copy the animation over. So I'm going to do unpack character. I think it's like Apex character unpack, or Apex unpack character. There we go. So I'm going to plug this into the scene animate, and then I'm going to do another null just so I can view the animation. And so here is, well, I guess we need to select a character first. So I'm going to select hand, And now we should be able to see our animation. So now these two rigs may look like they're the same, but this is the control rig. And the difference between the control rig and then the rig that we input into Apex is that our control rig is going to contain any controls that we added while we were in Apex. So basically this rig right here from the unpack character is coming from this output right here before it went into Apex. And this control extract is going to be including all of the controls that we added while we were in Apex. If you remember, we added that master control. And so in theory, there should be one more point in, and if we middle mouse click this, we'll see there's 18 points. And so that means that in the other rig, there should only be 17. And that is the case. So what we want to do is we want to take the animation from here and we want to put it on the control rig. And so let's start off by doing that. And so if you think about it, we want to drive this rig over here doesn't have the master controller, but we need our master controller to have animation on it. And so if we go over to actually, let's go into the rig. Let's go over here to the auto rig component. I'm just going to put the display flag on there. So for the secondary motion, we're going to be putting secondary motion, and we're going to be using our master right here as the source. And so if we look right here, if we select this joint right here and try to move it, it's not going to rotate or do anything. And the reason why is that it's being constrained by this master. And so the master is going to be the one that's controlling that joint. And so for our secondary motion, we can't set this joint master as the source. It needs to be the master controller because that's where our actual animation is going to be living. Because if you remember when we used the scene add character, we did all of the animation on that controller. And so unfortunately, our rig that we extracted, the control rig, it doesn't have any animation on it. And so we need to find a way to take our animation from our rig and then add it onto our control rig. And so we can do that. I'm going to drop down a rig pose. And I'm going to wire it into the control skeleton. And so if we remember, we put our master controller in the same place as our first joint. And so when we select this, it's going to bring up this little UI that says which joint you want to select, because again, they're both in the same spot. So I'm going to select the master. And so this is the joint that we did the animation on. However, you'll notice that when I move it, the rest of the rig isn't moving. And that's because it's not parented. This joint master isn't parented to our master controller, and so we need to fix that really quickly. And so we can do that by using the parent joints kinefx node. So I'm going to do parent joints, and I'm going to plug that in. And so I'm just going to click plus so I can create a mapping, and then I'll click on the selector, and then this is going to be the joint, and then this is going to be the parent. And so we know that we want the joint master parented to the master controller. So I'll hit accept for joint 1, and then for parent, I'm going to select our master, and now we're going to go back to the rig pose. And now we can see that when we select the master and when we move it, now it's actually being moved properly, which is exactly what we want. And so now we're going to take the animation from here and we're going to put it on this control rig. And so just so you remember, this master controller doesn't exist over here, but because it's in the same spot as the joint, we can take the rotation from that joint and we can apply it to the master controller. And so let's do that really quickly. So we're going to start by using a rig match pose. And so this rig match pose, it allows you to align two skeletons together. It's typically used for retargeting, but our skeletons are going to be in the exact same spot because I'm going to be retargeting from the rest pose. And so if we look at it, let me enter the handles tool. You can see that the skeletons are in the same spot. So we really don't need to do anything. There's nothing to change. And so we can move on to the next one, which is map points. So now we can do our points mapping. And so let's see, the second input is just going to plug into the second input there. And so I'm going to make sure I have the handles tool selected. I'm going to move this over to the left because it's going to make it easier to see our different skeleton. And so if you remember, we want to take this, where is it? We want to take the joint master and we want to take the animation on it and apply it to our master controller. And so we're going to create a mapping between the two. So we can, I think that's the only one that we need to map because we only have animation on that one joint. So I'm going to select this joint master and then I'm going to come over here and then click on this. And then it's going to ask you which one did you want. And I'm going to do master. So basically what we've done is we've mapped our we've taken our master controller and we've mapped it to that joint, which will have animation. And so now the next node that we need is rig copy transforms. And we can plug this in. And so the first input will go here, but for the second input, we need it to grab the animated skeleton. So we can just bring that over there. And now we can put the display flag on here and we can see that it's moving. And I don't think it's actually working properly. Let me check. I guess the easy way to do that is let me just do the delete joint to make sure that this is working. And I'm going to select our controller, our master right there. I'm going to hit accept, delete it. And I think I'm going to delete everything but that. And there we go. So let me do a rig pose. And the reason why I'm doing a rig pose is just so I can see the orientation of the joint. And let me enter the handles. Yeah, and so we can see that this joint should be rotating, but it's not. And I think I know the reason why. Let's go back to this rig copy transforms. And it's because it says map using by attribute, but we want to use it by we want to do this matching by the map points that we just did. So we can switch this to mapping by attribute. And so now it'll use the mapping that we just created. And so now if we look at this, it's rotating properly, which is exactly what we need. So I can get rid of those two nodes because we don't want them anymore. And just got some silly error, just going to ignore that. And so now we can do our secondary motion. And so I'm going to do two separate ones because I'm going to give some of the finger joints like a separate value from the wrist. But let's go ahead and do our first one. So I'm going to do secondary motion, and then I'm going to plug this in right there. And let's see, what are we going to do? So we need to choose the driver joint. For the driver, we're obviously going to use the master because that's the one that has the animation on it. And then for the joint group, I think for this one, we're just going to do the wrist. And then we're going to give the controls, we're going to give the fingers some separate values. And so I think that's good. So I'm going to just copy some values from my other scene that I know work well. So I'm going to do 1.2 for the effect multiplier. And then I'm just going to put in some other values here, and you can just mess around and see what looks good. And we'll see how these values affect the animation in a second. So now I'm going to hit play. And so now you can see that the wrist is starting to lag behind the rest of the animation. So this is looking really cool, but we also want to do this for the rest of the fingers. And so I'm going to copy this node by hitting Alt click, and then that's going to duplicate it. And it kind of sucks because when you duplicate the node, it's not connected to the node that you would expect it to be. So I'm just going to wire it into the correct one. Perfect. And then I think for this one, though, where it says joint group, I'm going to select all of the joints except the wrist because we already have that one done. And then if we play it, we can see that the fingers are like getting they're lagging way too much. And so that's why I wanted to give them separate values. So I'm just going to put the effect multiplier down to like 0.6. And then for the rest of them, I think I'll just do 0.2 for that. And then I'm just copying the values over, but you should test them out to see what works well. So now we can see that we're getting this cool, smooth animation where the fingers are sort of lagging behind the main animation. And like I said, you can mess with this and get different values. You can make it like lag really far behind and do whatever you want, whatever you think looks good. Now that we have this done, we need to add this back. We need to add this animation back into our Apex scene. And so the first thing that we're going to drop down is a control update params. So let me drop that down. And then for the params, we're going to grab that skeleton, and then this is going to go into the control extract. And so like these nodes are used together all the time. So the control extract and then the control update params. And this is a standard workflow for doing this. And if you want to learn about that, it talks about it in the docs, in the Houdini documentation. All right. And so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to convert this into a motion clip. And so we're going to do a motion clip, and we're going to plug this in. And now we're going to see all of our poses right here, each frame. And so usually when I'm working on a big scene with a lot of animation, at this point, I'll usually drop down a file cache and just cache this out. Because if you have a lot of animation that's pretty lengthy, it can take a while to compute this motion clip. But for now, it's good enough. And so then the next thing we need to do is channel, I think it's channel primitives from motion clip. And that's exactly what we need. And so we're going to plug this second because it's looking for a motion clip here. We'll plug that in and put our display flag on that. And we don't really see anything now, but that's fine. And so the next thing we need to do is add the animation in. And so I'm going to do Apex add animation, Apex scene add animation. And then the scene, for the scene, I guess we're just going to grab the animation that we did there. And let me just drag this node down. Oops, I didn't grab the node. There we go. I can't do it. There we go. And so then we're going to take this and we're going to drag it into the channel primitives. And the input type is, it should be channel prims because that's what this is right there. And so now when we do this, it should look like it's working. And there's one more thing we got to do. We didn't choose a character to effect, so now we can do hand. And so now when I play it, now it's working properly. So now this is working. Now that we have this full thing worked out, if you want, you can go around and mess with values and find something that looks good for you. So just as a quick overview of what we did, so we built our rig using kinefx nodes, and then we gave some attributes to our rig that told Apex how we want the rig to act. And then we used Apex nodes to create the rig logic. And then after that, we did scene animation. And then we went from Apex back into kinefx where we added some secondary motion. And then we took that secondary motion and then we put it back into our Apex scene. And so here's the cool part. Right here, I can go and I can type in scene animate and I can do another scene animate. So if I put the display flag on here and then I go to our animate tool, the cool thing is that if I click on this, we can see that all of the keyframes or all of the animation data that we added over there is now added as keyframes, which is really cool. And so now you can do additional animation if you want. Like if we had other controls, we could add more animation to it. And you could do more animation on this too, but if you needed to do more animation on this, probably what you would do is you would probably open the animation editor and then you would select the keys because there's a key for each frame because that's just the way it works. You could select these keys and then you could do edit and then you could do reduce keyframe to selected values. And then if you run this right here, you'll see that it tries to reduce the amount of keyframes that are required to create the same motion. And so, but like I said, that's a little bit beyond this tutorial, so I'm going to undo that for now and just keep this there. But that's pretty much it. I really hope you enjoy this tutorial and you learned a lot about Apex. Well, I guess not a lot, but you have a basic understanding of how to use both kinefx and Apex together in order to rig this hand. And just again, I wanted to say that this scene, you'll be able to get this scene on Patreon. It's going to be available for free, and the scene is the hip file I'm giving is going to have both the finished result and then also it's going to have the starting point of where I started at the beginning of this tutorial. But anyway, thank you very much, and I hope you have a good week.